I'm Ruthi, and I'm so excited you're crafting with me today. This is one of my favorite makes ever, and I hope you love it as much as I do. You have 15 pattern pieces, and you'll need to cut them all out. Try to cut on the line or right outside of it. Take your time and use a nice, sharp pair of scissors. In my classes, I review cutting techniques, because this is a skill we don't really revisit after preschool. You may notice that my scissor hand almost exclusively opens and closes the scissors. My other hand is the one moving and turning the fabric. So I'm not really twisting my scissors around the fabric. I am moving the fabric in line with my cuts. You may wonder why it matters if you do this. We all know how to cut after all. Well, it helps with hand fatigue, and it gives you a lot more control over your cuts, allowing you to get very precise lines and shapes. So good technique is very important. You have 15 pieces to cut out. Make sure you get them all, because you'll need each and every one. If you are cutting on the line, then you want to continue making sure that you cut all the pieces on the line. If you're cutting a little bit outside the line, that's okay too, and that is usually called a seam allowance. Try to make sure that your seam allowance is the same all around. Do you have 15 pieces? That's great. Make sure to count them. This is also a good time to kind of look at your pieces and see if some need trimming or the seam allowances are a little excessive. Lay your two body pieces on top of each other and make sure they line up. If they don't, try flipping one of the pieces and see if that helps. It usually does. We're going to be using a running stitch to sew this owl body together. In the booklet that comes with this kit, there's a diagram of what that looks like. The trick is to try to make your stitches small and equal in length. Thread length is also important. If you make your thread too long, it'll for sure tangle. So what you want to do is make your thread about 2 feet in length at the most. Make sure it's knotted really well at the end, and then go for it. You're starting at the bottom of one side, sewing up and around to get to the bottom of the other side. Don't sew the bottom closed. You're going to need that space in order to stuff your owl. As you can see, every few stitches I stop and I kind of spread them out and make sure that my spacing is really good. Make sure to knot your thread at the bottom really well so that it holds once we open it all up. So now you're going to flip the whole thing inside out like a pair of socks and straighten it all up. Gently push out the sides of the owl using a fat marker or something similar. Don't use anything thin and sharp so you don't accidentally puncture the sides. The next step is stuffing the owl and patching up the bottom. We're going to start this by making a pocket with that rectangle from the pattern pieces. Fold it in half and start stitching it up with a running stitch along 2 sides. You're leaving one side open in order to put the bag of marbles into that pocket. Once it's in there, sew it closed. It really doesn't matter what this little pocket looks like because it's going to go inside your owl and nobody will see it. Just make sure the stitches are close enough together so that you're not losing any marbles. We're now going to stuff our owl. You're going to take that bag of stuffing and you are really going to force it in to the owl in its entirety. You're going to want to use a pencil or a pen or something to kind of push it in there into the corners of the head and especially into the neck so your neck isn't floppy. Once your owl is stuffed, we're going to take that pocket of marbles that we just sewed and place it at the bottom. Then you are going to sew your owl shut. It doesn't really matter what this looks like, since we're going to be placing a patch on top of it. Just make sure it's fairly tightly sewn so that the weight doesn't go sliding around inside of your owl. Once your owl is sewn shut, you want to make sure you're knotting that thread, and then you can snip it off. And now comes the fun part. You got to make sure that your owl is actually standing up straight. So you may have to tap it on the table a couple of times to make certain of this. So that round piece from the pattern is our patch. It's a great place to write your name or the date or any message you choose. Use a thin Sharpie for this. I like to write "Made with Love." Then we're going to sew it on. I use a blanket stitch for the edge, which you can see diagrammed in the accompanying booklet, but whatever works. If you prefer to use a running stitch again, or even to glue the patch on, you may certainly do so. But if you are sewing it, stand the owl on its head and go for it. Moving along to the face. The face is made up of 4 separate pieces. You are going to stack the face pieces up, trimming them where you feel like there's a need. This is where some research will be helpful to you. There are so many types of owl, and their faces, eyes, and beaks all look a little bit different. Go online and see what you want your owl to look like. We're going to draw on eyes and a beak next. Don't forget to leave a glare in your eyes. Mine are triangles. I noticed when I was making my owls that the bigger that glare triangle was, the creepier my owl looked, so plan accordingly. I use a pencil to do this, and I make sure that my eyes are the same on both sides. Put in that glare triangle, and then the beak. The beak can extend past that little piece of face too, and you can add that in later. I then use a marker to darken everything. As you can see, I'm extending my beak just a little bit. We are now going to stitch the 4 layers of base together using some tiny inconspicuous stitches. You want to make sure they're not very visible. I like to put one in between the eyes or maybe above them, one under the beak, and maybe a couple through the bottom layers where they won't be seen. You can see that my stitches kind of make a little square in the back of the owl's face. This makes sure that all the layers are sewn together really well and firmly. Put that aside, and then we're going to go on to the body. Lay out your wings and chest piece, making sure the wings are mirror images. Remember, one is facing towards the middle center of the owl, and the other is facing the middle center from the opposite side. Check out the booklet for the diagram of feathers that I draw on my owls. I like to draw in all of my pencil markings, then cut. It doesn't matter whether you have a snowy owl, a barn owl, or a pygmy owl, they all have feathers. To cut in the notches for the feathers, I fold my fabric along the center of those drawn-on triangles, then make a very small cut along my pencil lines. You'll repeat this process for all of your pattern pieces that have feathers. I then make cuts all along the sides of the pieces. These side feathers will stick out once the pattern piece is sewn on, and they'll look just like feathers. Okay, on to color. Any kind of marker will work for your owls, but I do like to add small details using a thin Sharpie. Real-life owls are mostly shades of brown, gray, white, and black. And even snowy owls have more than just white feathers. Be creative! This is where your owl can have a lot of personality and details. Use any colors you like if you aren't really concerned about making your owl look realistic. Look at my examples if you want ideas for patterns or markings to use. I typically use dots and lines on my owls, and sometimes a little bit of both. You'll have an opportunity later to also add details and markings to your owl's face and head, shoulders, and back. So think about how you'd like to incorporate these as a whole design and not just on the wings or chest piece. In this video, I'm showing how to attach the face first, but I actually recommend doing this last. Oops! The reason being is that you'll want to still add color and details to the face later on. And while that's possible to do once it's attached, it's easier to do if it isn't. Either way, you can do it later on if you'd prefer, or now. Remember, your stitches need to be small and inconspicuous, especially on the face. Next, I add the chest piece by sewing around the shape, then the back tail feathers. Remember, these are staggered, with the bottom one going on first, and the fourth one going on last at the top. I just sew these across from side to side. It's really simple. Finally, it's time to add the wings. Check their size and placement by laying them onto your owl. Trim away any areas that are too big or that overlap too far on the chest or back. A little overlap is good, but you don't want your gorgeous details hidden by a wing as big as a blanket. Sew the wings on by sewing around the edge or the shape of the wing, but don't get too close to that edge. Make sure the feathers aren't getting caught in your stitches. Your wings need to face the right direction. Remember, you want the points facing the center of the back. When you're sewing on the wings, the chest piece, and the tail feathers, some bunching of the material is fine. In fact, it's actually a bonus. It'll make your feathers stick out more and add more of a 3D effect to them. So don't worry if things aren't smooth. Once I'm done adding all the pieces, I make a firm knot at the end underneath the feathers so you can't see it. Then I like to take my scissors and add some feathers along the edges, maybe where I trimmed earlier, just where it's missing. Here are some of my previously made owls. Aren't they the cutest? I adore them. Here you can see the amount of detail I've added to the shoulders, the neck, and the back of the head. I like a lot of details on my owls, and I think it adds to their personality. Take a look at how each owl is different, but they all have variations on lines or dots, or sometimes both. As I mentioned earlier, I like to take details from the body and add them to the neck, head, and shoulders. Look how naked this little guy looks with nothing on the back of his head or face. So if I used a color or shape, line or dot on the body, I will now add them to the different layers of the face, the neck, the top of the head, and the back of the head. As in all the rest of the owl's body, I like to use a very thin Sharpie for those small details, and then I add the larger details with a thicker marker. Watch me struggle now as I try to add detail to the owl's face while it is sewn on. If I had waited to sew it on at the end, I wouldn't have this much trouble trying to add all those details now. You can see I'm using a thick marker here to kind of peel away the layers of the face and add some color behind. This just gives a nice contrast for when those top layers are laying on top of the darker layer. girl, and as you can see, I'm going around with my markers again and again, adding another layer and another layer. Especially on the face, it definitely makes a difference if you treat each layer of the face as its own entity. That is, adding details on that one layer that you may not see on another layer. This gives the illusion that there is a lot of texture and pattern there, makes it all a lot more interesting to look at. Oh my goodness, you're done. Look at your little guy. Okay, I do like to go around and trim off any odd end threads or pieces that are sticking out, or maybe add another feather or two to the edges, just because I'm a perfectionist. You can do this, or you can choose not to. I also fluff up those feathers so that they're super three-dimensional and sticking out. What I love most about these owls is that each one is completely unique and one of a kind. Thank you for creating with me. I hope you enjoyed making your owl and that you love it. I'm always interested in seeing what you've made. Please email me pictures or tag me on Facebook or Instagram. You can find even more kits on ruthimakes.com. Please note, this pattern, kit, design, video, and assembly instruction are all copyrighted and the intellectual property of Ruthi Makes. This pattern and design are for personal use only and cannot be copied or reproduced in any way for personal gain purposes. Attrition must be provided when used for promotional or personal purposes. Thank you for respecting my ideas and creations and for crafting with me today.